Somewhere in Virginia, buried under 300 years of forgotten paperwork, there's a number that historians do not like to say out loud: 60%. That is the estimated share of Black Americans who carry at least one Igbo ancestor. Not African ancestor, not West African ancestor, one specific people from one specific river delta in what is now southeastern Nigeria. And almost nobody has been told this, not in schools, not in textbooks, not even in most family trees. What you're about to hear is not a story about Africa. It is a story about America and about a people whose bloodline became the hidden architecture of an entire nation's identity. For centuries, the story of the transatlantic slave trade has been told as one undifferentiated tragedy. Millions of people, stripped of names, stripped of nations, stripped of anything that could be traced back. That is the version most of us grew up with: a void, a blank space where identity used to be. But that version is wrong, and it has been wrong for a long time, because buried inside shipping manifests, plantation ledgers, court records, and now inside 21st century DNA databases is a pattern too consistent to be a coincidence. One ethnic group did not simply disappear into the anonymous mass of African. One ethnic group left fingerprints so deep that they reshaped the culture, the language, and even even the bloodstream of an entire country. That group was the Igbo. And what happened to them, and because of them, is one of the most undertold chapters in American history. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. Historians who study the Bight of Biafra, the West African coastal region that includes what is now southeastern Nigeria, have pieced together a staggering figure. Of the 1.7 million people forced out of that region during the entire era of the Atlantic slave trade, roughly 1.3 million of them were Igbo. Read that again. Not a minority within a larger group, the overwhelming majority. This was not a scattering of individuals swept up alongside other ethnicities. This was a targeted, sustained generational extraction of one people, funneled through specific ports, Calabar, Bonny, the Niger Delta, and loaded onto ships bound overwhelmingly for one destination above all others, the American colony of Virginia. Yeah. And this is where the story stops being about Africa and starts being about America. Because Virginia did not receive a random cross section of enslaved Africans. Virginia became, in the words of historians who have spent their careers on this exact question, something close to an extension of Igbo land itself. Of the roughly 37,000 Africans recorded arriving in Virginia from the Calabar region during the 1700s, an estimated 30,000 of them were Igbo. Some researchers place the share of Biafran captives among all people trafficked into Virginia at somewhere between 30 and 45%. And of those, as many as 80% were Igbo. In parts of the 18th century, Igbo people made up more than 30% of the entire enslaved population of the Virginia Tidewater. Some historians have gone so far as to nickname colonial Virginia Igbo land, not as poetry, as a demographic fact. Think about what that actually means. It means that when we talk about the founding of some researchers place the share of Biafran captives among all people trafficked into Virginia at somewhere between 30 and 45%, and of those, as many as 80% were Igbo. In parts of the 18th century, Igbo people made up more than 30% of the entire enslaved population of the Virginia Tidewater. Some historians have gone so far as to nickname colonial Virginia Igbo land, not as poetry, as a demographic fact. Think about what that actually means. It means that when we talk about the founding of American slave society, the Chesapeake, the tobacco economy, the plantation culture that would go on to define the antebellum South, we're not talking about a generic African import. We are talking, in large part, about the forced transplantation of one specific West African civilization onto American soil in numbers large enough to shape the culture from the ground up. Historian Douglas Chambers, who spent years reconstructing this history, described what happened in Virginia as a process of Igboization, the slow, forced, and largely unacknowledged transformation of early African American culture into something built on Igbo foundations. foundations. That is not a footnote. That is a rewriting of the origin story of Black America. But here is where it gets worse, or depending on how you look at it, more remarkable. This wasn't a one-time historical accident that faded out. The concentration was so deep and so sustained across generations that its effects rippled forward for centuries. Chambers, after years of archival work, arrived at an estimate that should stop anyone in their tracks. He suggested that perhaps 60% of Black Americans today have at least one Igbo ancestor. Sit with that number, 60%. In a country where the popular narrative has always been that African American ancestry is an unrecoverable blur, too many ships, too many ports, too many centuries of forced silence, one historian is arguing that the majority of Black Americans carry a direct, traceable line back to a single, specific West African people. That is not a blur. That is a signal cutting through 300 years of static. Funeral customs, spiritual practices, methods of resistance, even patterns of community organization among enslaved people in the Chesapeake. Researchers have traced threads of all of it back to Igbo cultural frameworks that never fully died, because there were simply too many Igbo people, packed too densely for their culture to be erased the way slaveholders intended. This is not chaos, this is structure. And once you understand the structure, you start to understand why the enslavers themselves treated Igbo captives so differently. With a mixture of demand and fear that shows up again and again in colonial records. Planters wanted Igbo labor because Biafran ports were brutally a cheap and steady supply line, but they also feared what they called Igbo rebelliousness, a reputation recorded again and again in plantation documents for resistance, for a refusal to simply be broken. That reputation was not a myth invented by nervous slaveholders. It has a name, a date, and a location. And it is where this story turns from statistics into something closer to legend. May 1803, Dunbar Creek, St. Simon's Island, Georgia. A group of Igbo captives, somewhere around 75 people, newly purchased in Savannah, were being transported by ship to their final destination of enslavement. Something happened on that water that has echoed through black slaveholders. It has a name, a date, and a location. And it is where this story turns from statistics into something closer to legend. May 1803, Dunbar Creek, St. Simon's Island, Georgia. A group of Igbo captives, somewhere around 75 people, newly purchased in Savannah, were being transported by ship to their final destination of enslavement. Something happened on that water that has echoed through Black American memory for over 2 centuries. The captives rose up. They overpowered the crew. 3 sailors were killed in the struggle. And then, according to the accounts passed down and later corroborated by historians, the Igbo captives who had seized the vessel made a choice that no slaveholder's ledger could ever process. Rather than submit to bondage, at least 10 of them walked into the water of Dunbar Creek, singing, and did not come back out. This is where you have to stop and really sit with what you're being told. This was not despair. Read the way it has survived in Gullah Geechee oral tradition, and you find something closer to defiance carved into folklore. The story became known as the myth of the Flying Africans, the belief that the souls of those who drowned did not die at all, but flew back across the ocean, back to Africa, back to freedom, because death was preferable to enslavement, and because a soul that chooses its own ending cannot be owned by anyone. For descendants of the enslaved along the Georgia and Carolina coast, this was not a horror story to be buried. It was a story to be protected, retold, sung, and eventually sanctified. And here is where the past reaches directly into the present, closer than most people realize. Igbo landing did not stay confined to oral history and regional folklore. It surfaced in the Love Drought sequence, where Black women walked together into open water in a sequence that critics and historians alike have connected directly back to Dunbar Creek. A moment of mass resistance from 1803 involving a specific West African ethnic group is still shaping mainstream American pop culture in the 21st century. That is not a dead history. That is a live wire. So why isn't this common knowledge? Why does the 60% figure not appear in classrooms? Part of the answer is structural. The same reason so much of African American genealogical history stayed buried for so long. Enslavers stripped names on arrival. They renamed people, broke apart families, and destroyed the paper trails that could have preserved ethnic origin. For most of American history, tracing a specific African ethnicity for a specific family was treated as functionally impossible. The prevailing assumption, reinforced for generations, was that this information was gone, permanently. And that assumption became its own kind of quiet erasure, not just of names, but of the idea that reconnection was even possible. But that assumption is now being dismantled in real time. And this is where the story escalates again. Commercial DNA testing has done something historians spent 2 centuries unable to do at scale. It has started handing back specific answers to specific families. Companies like 23andMe launched dedicated African ancestry projects, specifically to expand the reference populations available for African American customers, adding data from Nigeria and other West African nations so that a person spitting into a tube in Atlanta or Chicago could, for the first time, see a country, sometimes even an ethnic group attached to a fragment of their own genome. Ancestry DNA has reported tens of millions of DNA samples now in its database, with over 1 trillion genetic matches connected in a single recent year alone. What used to be an unanswerable question is now, for a rapidly growing number of families, something you can literally receive in an email. But, and this is the twist most people don't see coming, the answers are messier and stranger than the marketing promises. Some families discover a large, confident Nigerian percentage on their first test, only to watch that number shift dramatically when the company updates its reference panels a year later, reallocating what used to read as Nigeria into more specific or more Bantu linked categories. Genetic ancestry is not a fixed photograph. It is closer to a moving negotiation between imperfect reference databases and the messy, mixed, migratory reality of real human history. Genome-wide studies of African American ancestry have found people who identify as African American ranging from as little as 1% West African ancestry to as much as 99%, with a median European ancestry contribution sitting around 18 to 20%, the genetic residue of centuries of forced and coerced mixing under slavery. The story DNA tells is real, but it is not simple and it does not arrive the way a viral headline wants it to. This is where the deeper, harder truth sits, and it is worth saying plainly instead of dressing it up. Some corners of the internet have taken the genuine, documented Igbo-American connection and pushed it somewhere the evidence does not go, toward claims that Igbo genetics trace back to a lost tribe of Israel, that DNA has proven an ancient Hebrew bloodline running through southeastern Nigeria and into Black America. This belief is real, and it matters to the people who hold it. It has deep roots inside Igbo cultural and religious identity, part of a long tradition of oral history claiming Israelite descent through figures like Eri and Gad. But it is worth being honest here. Mainstream population genetics does not support it as an established scientific finding, and Nigerian scholars themselves have pushed back hard against the idea, with historians on the ground calling the genetic version of the claim exactly what it is, unsupported. The real story does not need that embellishment. The real story is bigger and stranger and true, because the true legacy is not a mythical bloodline stretching back to the ancient Near East. It is something more immediate and more American than that. It is the fact that a specific West African people, funneled by the tens of thousands into a specific American colony in numbers large enough to reshape its culture from the inside out, went on to become, quietly, structurally, without acknowledgement, one of the primary genetic and cultural foundations of Black America itself. It is the fact that a word for a vegetable, a rhythm in a parade, a funeral custom, a reputation for defiance, and a 2-century-old myth about souls flying home over open water are not separate curiosities. They are pieces of the same buried architecture, still holding up a culture that never got to see its own blueprint. And here is the part that should unsettle anyone who thought this was simply a closed chapter of history. The story is still moving. Genealogists and DNA researchers are still refining these estimates. Pilgrimages are still made to Dunbar Creek, where descendants and diaspora communities from Nigeria, Haiti, and Belize continue to gather pour water, sing, and mark ground that official American history rarely mentions. New documentaries are still being released, still being watched, still reopening a wound and a reclamation at the same time. Families are still opening DNA reports and discovering, for the first time in their lives, a name for a piece of themselves they were told did not exist. So the real question is not whether the Igbo shaped America. The evidence for that is no longer seriously contested by the historians who have spent careers reconstructing it. The real question is what happens next, as reference databases keep improving, as more descendants test their DNA, as more archival records get digitized and cross-referenced against slave ship manifests that once seemed permanently silent. How many more of these buried demographic truths are sitting in plantation ledgers and Bight of Biafra shipping records, waiting for someone to finally connect the dots? How many families